I cannot tell you how important it is to have their support.
His war on our Second Amendment rights must be stopped.
The Biden regime gets 4 more years. They are coming for your guns. The survival of our Second Amendment is very much on the ballot.
Cured by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton ended overnight.
We will not let Biden continue his tyrannical abuse of power.
In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court of the United States recently upheld a 30-year-old law that bars domestic offenders from owning arms. This ruling marks a significant moment in the world of gun control and constitutional interpretation, signaling a departure from the court's recent trend of expanding gun rights under the Second Amendment. Chief Justice Roberts authored the opinion in an 8-1 decision, with Justice Thomas as the sole dissenter, highlighting a notable consensus among the justices on this contentious issue. Zaki Rahimi's precedents. The case centered around Zaki Rahimi, a Texas man accused of multiple instances of firing guns in public while under a protective order stemming from allegations of domestic V. His actions underscore the risks associated with domestic offenders having access to arms, prompting Texas and the federal government to enforce laws restricting such access. Chief Justice Roberts, in his majority opinion, emphasized that the Second Amendment right to bear arms is not unlimited. The court acknowledged the state's compelling interest in protecting individuals from DV and preventing potential tragedies associated with armed possession by those who pose a clear threat to public safety. The decision comes in the wake of the court's landmark ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Inc. v. Bruin, which established a framework directing courts to consider historical traditions when assessing the constitutionality of gun regulations. This standard represented a departure from previous interpretations that had expanded individual gun rights, prompting a wave of legal challenges and uncertainties in lower courts. Chief Justice Roberts' opinion in Rahimi clarified that while historical precedent provides guidance, modern gun safety laws need not have precise historical analogs to be considered constitutional. This nuanced approach aims to balance the evolving societal needs with foundational constitutional principles, steering away from overly rigid interpretations that could hinder legislative efforts to address contemporary challenges. Debates on the decision. The 8-1 ruling in Rahimi has been welcomed by advocates of gun control and domestic abuse prevention, who see it as a pivotal step towards enhancing public safety. Janet Carter of Everytown for Gun Safety noted that the decision significantly favors gun violence prevention laws, providing clarity and direction to lower courts grappling with similar issues. However, the dissenting opinion of Justice Thomas underscored broader philosophical divisions within the court regarding the scope of Second Amendment protections. Justice Thomas argued for a stricter interpretation rooted solely in historical context, suggesting that civil court protective orders may not warrant stripping individuals of their constitutional right to bear arms without a criminal conviction. In practical terms, the Rahimi decision clarifies that states and the federal government have leeway to enact and enforce laws aimed at disarming individuals who pose a clear threat of violence, particularly in the context of DV. It reaffirms the judiciary's role in striking a balance between protecting constitutional rights and safeguarding public safety, emphasizing the importance of due process and fair legal proceedings. The decision's broader implications extend beyond Rahimi's case, influencing ongoing debates over the constitutionality of various gun control measures. It provides a framework for evaluating future challenges to arm regulations, emphasizing the need for a nuanced approach that considers both historical traditions and contemporary societal concerns. Freedom context. The Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, a cornerstone of American legal discourse, states, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of a people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed." This succinct sentence has sparked decades of debate over its meaning and scope, particularly concerning the rights of individuals versus the power of the government to regulate arms. Historically, the Supreme Court has wrestled with interpreting the Second Amendment, leading to landmark decisions such as District of Columbia v. Heller and McDonald v. Chicago. These cases solidified an individual's right to possess arms for self-defense within their home, establishing a broad interpretation that bolstered gun rights advocates. However, despite these precedents, the court's recent ruling represents a shift in its approach to Second Amendment cases, focusing on public safety concerns and the regulation of arms in specific contexts. The specific law under review prohibits individuals convicted of DV from possessing arms. This restriction aims to address the heightened risk posed by such DV offenders who have access to arms, a risk that has been extensively documented in studies and law enforcement reports. Statistics show that access to arms significantly increases the likelihood of fatal outcomes in domestic incidents, making this issue a critical public safety concern. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, emphasized the state's interest in protecting victims of domestic hurt and preventing further violence. The court acknowledged that arm regulations aimed at disarming individuals who pose a credible threat to others' safety are constitutionally sound under the Second Amendment. This stance aligns with the broader principles of public safety and the government's role in regulating potentially dangerous activities.
So the majority leader has decided to bring up a bill called the Bump Act. Claims this bill will ban bump stock. The Bump Act targets common firearm accessories, not just bump stock.
Implications and controversies. While the court's decision is hailed as a victory by gun control advocates and domestic victims' rights groups, it also raises several significant implications and controversies that warrant careful consideration. Constitutional interpretation and Second Amendment rights. The ruling narrows the scope of the Second Amendment as previously interpreted in Heller and McDonald. These earlier decisions emphasized an individual's right to possess arms for self-defense, particularly within their home. By upholding restrictions on DV offenders, the court suggests that public safety interests can justify limitations on gun ownership rights, even for those who have not been convicted of a felony. This shift in interpretation may influence future Second Amendment cases, prompting challenges and discussions about the balance between individual rights and public safety. It shows the evolving nature of constitutional law and the court's role in adapting to societal changes and concerns. Consensus among the justices. The 8-1 decision, with only Justice Thomas dissenting, highlights a rare consensus among the justices on a contentious issue. This unity underscores the seriousness with which the court views the risks associated with domestic violence and arms, transcending traditional ideological divides. However, Justice Thomas's dissent raises significant questions about the scope of government authority to restrict constitutional rights based on criminal conduct. His dissenting opinion underscores the ongoing debate over the interpretation of the Second Amendment and the limits of legislative action in regulating arm ownership. Beneath the consensus, the conservative justices who greenlighted the new Second Amendment standard appeared uncertain of how to apply it to other questions. 3 of them wrote concurring opinions defending the originalist notion of trying to interpret gun rights in the context of the framers' understanding. They all emphasized that the Rahimi decision applied narrowly to his long-shot case, and that judging the constitutionality of gun laws by historical tradition would still provide a legal basis for future challenges. Justice Neil Gorsuch raised the possibility that the law they upheld might be unconstitutional if someone subject to a protective order for domestic violence attempted to secure a firearm for self-defense. Justice Brett Kavanaugh highlighted that the court still endorsed limitations like keeping firearms away from felons, forbidding firearms in sensitive places, and regulating gun sales. Justice Amy Coney Barrett foreshadowed that harder gun constitutionality questions are still yet to be resolved. Safeguarding against biases and false accusations. While the law's intent is to protect victims of domestic hurt, concerns have been raised about potential biases and false accusations within the legal system. The court's decision acknowledges these concerns implicitly by affirming the need for due process and careful consideration of individual rights in implementing arm regulations. Efforts to safeguard against wrongful restrictions on gun ownership must include robust procedural safeguards, such as ensuring fair legal proceedings and addressing any potential biases in enforcing DV laws. Balancing the rights of victims with the rights of the accused remains a complex challenge for lawmakers and judicial authorities alike. Practical implementation and enforcement. Enforcing restrictions on arm ownership by domestic violence offenders requires effective coordination between law enforcement agencies, courts, and regulatory authorities. Implementation challenges may include the identification and tracking of individuals prohibited from possessing arms, ensuring compliance with court orders, and addressing potential gaps in information sharing and enforcement protocols. Effective enforcement mechanisms and resources are essential to the successful implementation of arm regulations aimed at enhancing public safety and protecting vulnerable populations from domestic hurt. The Supreme Court's decision to uphold restrictions on arm ownership by domestic violence offenders reflects a nuanced approach to balancing individual rights and public safety concerns under the Second Amendment. By affirming the state's interest in protecting victims of domestic hurt and preventing future violence, the court underscores the evolving landscape of gun control laws and constitutional interpretation in the United States. While the ruling marks a departure from previous interpretations that emphasized expansive gun rights, it also underscores the judiciary's role in adapting to societal challenges and evolving legal principles. Moving forward, ongoing debates over the scope of Second Amendment rights, the impact of arm regulations on public safety, and the need for fair and effective enforcement mechanisms will continue to shape legislative and judicial responses to gun violence and domestic hurt. In navigating these complex issues, policymakers, legal experts, and advocacy groups must remain vigilant in safeguarding both constitutional rights and public safety, ensuring that laws and policies strike an appropriate balance that reflects the values and priorities of a diverse society. That's all for this video, folks. We'll see you next time.